So something a little different today. I'm heading to the garden centre because today's the day I finally get my seed potatoes, onion sets, shallots, you name it. Let's see what we get, but I'm hoping I don't break the bank today. We shall see. Let's go. So I've called into a garden centre on the way, a family-run business, and I'd like to have a look in there. So let's have a quick look now, and hopefully I can see whether or not they've got an assortment of potatoes and onions here before I head off to Chepstow Garden Centre. But let's have a look. So sadly, they did not have the stock that I wanted yet. They've said that it's coming in next week, but I want it now. So I'm heading off to Chepstow Garden Centre now, so let's go. So I've headed to another garden centre, Pew's. I'm hoping that they've got the potato selection that I want. So let's go inside, let's have a look, and also let's go buy my onions. Well, I am absolutely over the moon. I managed to get all the potato varieties that I needed and also the onion sets. I managed to check every single individual one to make sure that they weren't soft. So, mission complete. So you've got your potatoes, what now? So now you need to decide whether or not you chit or no chit. So it's all about the process of how you store those potatoes now before you need to plant them out. Now first earlies are usually put in now at late March, and then you put the second earlies then in April, and then the main crop then in late April, May time. So the idea is that we've got 3 different types of potatoes in the UK that you can grow stagnantly, so that you've got first earlies, like I'll put a list of first earlies here, which would be easier rather than me just giving you my favourites, because they're just a personal choice to me. So these are some of the first earlies, and you can put them in, you know, late March, and then to start planting maybe in buckets as well, 30-litre buckets. And then the idea is that you'll have them first, obviously, hence why they're called first earlies. But I find those ones are not as tasty as whether or not if you're waiting. So I tend to hold back on them as much as I can. I do 1 or 2 buckets, mainly because I'm eager and I'm excited to have those first potatoes. But my main ones is Charlotte potatoes, those second earlies. And I'll put a list here now of some second earlies as well. Now there is some beautiful varieties, but for me, the old favourite, the classic, and it's very reliable as well. You never get any problems with the Charlottes in my eyes, and the taste is phenomenal, and they store so well. So for me, Charlottes all the way. But you can also get main crops then as well, which are like your big beefy potatoes, you know, for like chips, mash and whatnot. So I'll pop a list here now of main crop potatoes as well that you want to try. I've bought a few first earlies, a lot of second earlies, and then I bought 1 variety then of main crop as well. Whether or not I change my mind, well, actually, we'll add on top of that as well that maybe 2 main crops, because I'm doing pink for apples as well, which I actually harvest as second earlies and also let them grow on as well if I want to a main crop. Now the pink for apples, if you haven't grown them before, they're absolutely beautiful, roasted. And they are knobbly, and they are a funny shape, and they are a bit finicky if you have to clean them. But if you have them in buckets of compost, usually if you harvest them straight away, you give them a quick rinse as soon as you get them out of the bucket. The soil don't tend to cling to all those little knobbly bits then on the potatoes. But would highly recommend them. They're quite a nutty flavour, and they're so rich. And I love putting them in some olive oil with some garlic, some onions in the oven, and roasting them off. Oh. So going back to chitting or no chitting, so the theory is that for the first and second earlies, if you put them out in like egg cartons, mine now are at home on little egg boxes and also module trays, just to keep them all spaced out so they're getting a lot of air. And then what you want to do is you want to keep them in a light, airy, cool room, not in direct sunlight. The idea is that you don't want those long white spindly shoots like sometimes you'll find in the bottom of your cupboards and stuff, and we've all had that. We've all had that in a bag of potatoes in the past. You want them to be quite tight and quite short, maybe like a centimetre to 2 centimetres. And then the theory is that when you do plant them out then, they have a head start. They've already had a few weeks head start of growing. So that's the theory anyway. So it's up to you. First and second earlies, I do chit. Main crops, no point doing that. Farmers never do it. They chuck them in the field, they let them grow, and they hope for the best. So main crop, I don't see any point doing that as well. But make sure you plant them as early as you can, but after the last frost. And then also try and get them in early. Don't keep thinking, I'll do that job next week, I'll do that job next week, like we all do with everything. Because you don't want to be getting into blight season then, because in the late summer, when those main crop are growing, you don't want them to be at the peak when it's very humid and there's a lot of rain, but also a lot of warmth. And that's when you get potato blight, and it'll decimate your crop. So get them in as early as you can, but not too early for the frost, but not too late for blight. So basically, in between the last frost and the blight season, try and get them in, as, right at the start of the last frost. And you can actually do that a little bit quicker if you want by planting them in buckets. Like I mentioned, 30-litre buckets. I have loads. I've even bought a pile more, which I'll show you now. I bought 10 more. I think I paid about £30 for them, and that's including the delivery for 10 buckets. So it works about £3 a bucket. And I mean, they last forever, and they're not only good for potatoes, you can do carrots in them, parsnips in them. I use them for weeding the bucket, and I also use them then, like I mentioned, for the potatoes. And then because they're in buckets, you can move them around. If you think there's going to be problems, you can bring them into a sheltered area and also store in them. Now I've still got buckets of potatoes in my greenhouse, which I do every year. I keep those second earlies, and I keep a couple of Charlotte buckets, and then I just keep harvesting them through the seasons, and they just store really, really well in those buckets. Just leave them in the compost, somewhere nice and dry. You don't want any rain going on them to rot them inside, but just keeping them there, and I just dig them out when I want. But now I'm pushing it now. February time is the time now where I'll be using the last of the potatoes, and I'm excited to plant more potatoes ready for this year. So if you're new to potatoes and you're thinking, but which ones do I choose? You know, which varieties would be best suited for me and my family? Then it is a personal preference. But if you like new potatoes at the start of summer, get the first and second earlies. But if you want things for like chips and mash and roast potatoes, the main crops, like they are the daddies of potatoes for later on in the seasons, for your winter foods, I'd say. But if you want fresh, nice buttery potatoes with some nice runner beans and some smoked bacon, or however you want to eat them, Charlotte potatoes all the way for me. But get those second earlies. They're the ones, in my eyes, are the main staple of my potato diet. So I can't wait for them, honestly. They are so fresh. And if you haven't, or you're thinking, should I grow them? Are they a waste of time? Maybe get a couple of buckets. You don't have to buy buckets. If you've got a couple of containers or an old recycle box, I've done that before. And I actually had the best pink fir apple harvest from a recycle box before. And I just put a pile of compost and manure, mix it all up, well-rotted manure. And they grew fine. And I put them in the greenhouse at the start because obviously you're waiting for that last frost. So you can actually plant your potatoes a couple of weeks before the last frost. If you've got a greenhouse or a polytunnel or a porchway or somewhere cool in your house, you don't want it too hot, because then once you bring it out, then it's not going to be the same temperature outside, but you don't want it freezing. So you can start them off a little bit early and push it, because obviously you only need to put them outside for sunlight once this foliage starts coming through the soil. So that period where they're growing inside the soil, forming roots off the potato seed, and then also bringing up the shoots, the tubers, that takes a couple of weeks as well. So you can start them off indoors in a porchway, somewhere, a little bit cool but not freezing, and that's the idea. So while I also bought some more shallots. I've got a lot of shallots, and I like using them in sauces, and they're a good staple, but also they store really well. They store way better than onions. So I bought quite a lot of banana shallots. I've got friends that have given me shallots. I've bought some in Malvern. I've got shallots going everywhere, but I like them, and I don't begrudge giving them that space. So this year I'm definitely going down the path of thinking, if I eat it and I really, really enjoy it, I will give it a full bed, because why not? Why am I only putting a couple in just because I want to put in a multitude of vegetables just so. But I've got 2 plots now that I can actually expand. I'm slowly going down the plot, trying to get the beds in, and it'll all be done before spring. It really will. But it's bloody freezing. A little update as well. See, all the spring bulbs are all coming up as well. So if you didn't put them in, look, they are peeping their heads up through the compost now. So it just proves that if you're a little bit late, they'll be all right. They'll be okay. So you've chosen your potatoes and you're wondering, where do I plant them? Do I plant them outside? Do I plant them in buckets? Do I plant them in hay bales? Do I plant them under sawdust, under duck manure? There's loads and loads of ways that you can actually plant potatoes, but for this year I'm going to be putting some in raised beds and some in buckets, and that's mainly because of storage later on. So I'm going to be putting some second early Charlottes in a raised bed. I'm going to be putting the main amount into buckets as well, because like I mentioned, I'll be using them through the season, and if there is any signs of like blight in the area, I can quickly put them into the polytunnel or get rid, take away all the homes and move them and store them. They're just a better way of moving those potatoes, because if they're in the ground and there's blight going all around your allotment plot or around your neighbouring gardens, there's nothing you can do if they're in the ground. There's nothing you can do, because it'll just come in and attack your crop just like it will with anyone else's. And yeah, I'm going to try and fail safe this year by, again, doing some in buckets, some in beds, but there's benefits to both, And the one thing is watering. Now, buckets sound like a godsend, doesn't they? They sound like the perfect thing. Let's grow them in buckets. But there is downsides to growing them in buckets. But I'll talk about growing in ground first. So in the ground, they will get a more consistent watering. Yes, you will have to water them just like you will in the buckets, but they've still got that moisture in the ground. And also, if you're not here to water, the heavens will give them water from the rain. But the downside of that is as well is that you have to keep constantly watering just like buckets. In buckets though, God, you have to be on top of it because it's relying on you to give it water. It's relying on you to feed it as well. So as much as you've put compost in there, you've put some manure in there, you've given it a good feed, you still need to keep an eye on those buckets. It's more of a controlled environment, which is good for storage and getting a nice crop. But outside sometimes, if you're a little bit of a lazy gardener, you think, oh, I haven't got time to be watering through the summer because I'm going to be going on loads of holidays, working loads of trips. Maybe put some in the beds as well because they are a bit better for looking after themselves, I will admit, in the beds. But there's swings and roundabouts to both theories, so it's up to you. It needs to be a personal preference to you whether or not you do buckets or bed. Now, I've got a new irrigation system that is going to be coming in by halves. I'm going to be putting that in now once the last frost comes. And I'll be fitting it into the polytunnel, and that will be automatically watering all those beds in there, all for the tomatoes. But it comes with 2 zones. So I'm going to have one zone going through all the polytunnel, and I'm going to have another zone that'll come out and actually water all those buckets so that I won't have to worry about it this year. So I'm free to go on holiday. I'm free to go on trips and I'll worry about my potatoes or my crops because I'm going to make sure that they get the right amount of water at the right times by using this nice irrigation system. So I'll pop a link to halves in the description, but I'll be fitting that up and doing a separate video for that system. It is an investment to the channel, but I feel like it'll be the best thing for this channel because watering your allotment is a massive tie, and it really does bind you to your plot sometimes in that nice weather when you want to be out with your friends, when you want to be at the beach. So I'm hoping it's going to detach that ball of chain of watering the potatoes in summer and also the tomatoes too. So feeding your potatoes. So yes, they will already have some feed in that compost or in the ground when you first put them in, but you might want to give them a boost later on, a couple of weeks after they've been in those buckets. So one mistake that a lot of people do is they chuck loads and loads of chicken manure pellets into the buckets, into the ground, thinking, oh, that's, it's easily available and that'll be really, really good for the potatoes. It's actually the worst thing you can do because they are very, very high in nitrogen, and then you'll have loads and loads of foliage. So if you think about nitrogen, nitrogen gives plants that big, lush green leaves on plants. So make sure that you're thinking that you want more under the ground rather than on top. So other things that you can use is like a little bit of a diluted seaweed feed. Yes, it's got nitrogen in it, but it'll be a little bit better. But my main feed for my potatoes is bloodfish and bone. If you are vegan, you can look at other options for vegan growing. Like there is vegan compost that you can actually buy, and you can grow your crops in those as well, or just grow directly in the ground. But for me, I use bloodfish and bone. It's got the right amount that I need for the potatoes. You can actually get specific potato feeds as well. I'll pop a link to those as well in the description. You can actually buy specific potato feeds, and they also do them for like tomatoes, onions, for a lot of your crops. But check the backs as well, because some of them are very, very identical, but they're more in price in the seasons that you need them. So check the backs sometimes, because you look at them and think, hang on, that's the same as this guy. So yeah, check the backs as well, because you can actually buy specific potato feeds. I have bought them before. Did I notice a better yield from them? I actually didn't, but I'm sure there's science in it. But for me, I just put a bit of bloodfish and bone and plus the compost feed that I've already had, and I just let them go. I just let them do what they need to do, but I just keep on topping up the water, and then a little feed then a couple of weeks after they've been in there, because they've probably depleted that compost of food by then. So if you are looking on the back of those packets and thinking which would be the best feed for my potatoes, you are looking for things enriched in potassium and phosphorus and a moderate amount of nitrogen. So nitrogen needs to be a little bit lower, but make sure there's got a good amount of phosphorus and potassium in there. And hopefully you'll have amazing yields in 2025. So fingers crossed to us all. Now in this size bed, I'd probably put 8 to 10 first and second early potatoes, because I want them to have a little bit more space, because you want them to have bigger yields. And then the main crop, I'd probably put about 6 potatoes in here, because I want them to be big potatoes. So just remember, if you do that rookie thing of thinking, I'll just chuck a couple more in, you know, I've got them spare in the bag and I'll just pop them in. The more potatoes that you try and cram in those buckets or in the ground, the smaller the crop will be. So just remember, if you want them to be small potatoes, that's okay, that's fine. But if you want them to be big, chunky potatoes for like chips and mash, don't try and push too many into the bed, because, yeah, they'll just keep fighting for the food. So you've decided to grow in buckets and you're thinking, how many do I put in each bucket? I know Tony at Simplified Gardening has got an extensive catalogue of videos on how to grow potatoes. Me personally, I'm going to be doing how Tony does. I'm going to be putting 4 in the first earlies and second earlies, and 2 main crops in the bucket. So if you've got first and second earlies, put 4 in, 2 one way and then 2 the other way. I'll show you later on in the video when I plant them up. And then in the main crop, I'm just going to be putting 2 potatoes in, and hopefully I'll get bigger yields. But I might do a few buckets as well with just 3 first earlies and second earlies. And then we'll see whether or not I'll get a bigger yield from those, because last year I didn't have the best harvest, and that could have been the compost, the weather, the watering that I did, or the lack of watering. Because it is, sometimes you'll water it, the next day you'll come back and they're bone dry. So they are an upkeep. So just remember, if you are going to be doing potato buckets, they're not an easy fix where you think, okay, I'll just put them on the buckets and leave them on the side and they'll be okay, and they'll just get watered with the rain. You need to keep on top of those buckets, because they do dry out. So I'm going to do a few different varieties and a few different variations of how to plant them this year. So yeah, I'm excited to grow potatoes in the ground and in buckets. So I'm going to answer this question before I get comments. So I'm going to answer this question before I get comments about it. What is the right pH for your potatoes? Now, the range should be around about slightly acidic. 5.5 to 6.5 is actually optimal. That's the perfect pH, but please do not worry if it's a little bit above or a little bit below. They will tolerate it. But what you really don't want to is high pH of alkaline or acidic. You want them to be in that middle area. So the optimal is 5.5 to 6.5 on the pH scale. So, but don't be stressing about it. But I thought I'd cover that as well, because I've done this a couple of times and a few people have been worrying about the pH in this soil. If they are slightly alkaline, that's okay as well, or a little slightly acidic, perfect. But don't be worried about it. But if your soil is very high on alkaline or very high on the pH scale, acidic, then maybe consider growing them in buckets, because they will tolerate, there's quite a high tolerance, but the yields might be worse. So it might be better for you to looking at buckets if they're too far off that scale. So what am I doing this for? But yeah, 5.5 to 6.5 is the perfect pH for potatoes. So we've covered all that, and now we're thinking, where do we plant those potatoes? Where would be the best place on my plot, in my garden, to grow potatoes? And the answer is, you can go into a slightly shady area, but getting a nice amount of sun through the day. But you don't want them to be baking hot either, because if you're growing in buckets, they will definitely dry out very quick. But having a little bit of shade is perfect, and then getting a nice amount of sun and then going back into shade. I actually think mine might go on the back of the polytunnel. Now you're probably thinking, they won't get no sun there. They get loads of sun there, because the sun will be higher up as well in spring and summer. It'll get perfect amount of sun, it'll be sheltered, but still getting a nice amount of light through the day as well, but not baking those potatoes, because a baked potato later on is good, but not at the start of the season when you're trying to grow them. So don't put them in sweltering heat where the soil keeps drying up and damaging those tubers underneath. You want to make sure that they get a nice bit of sun, but again, also getting a nice bit of shade as well, and keep them watered. You can't go wrong with a bit of water, I tell you. Now, my only gamble by putting them so close to the polytunnel is tomato blight as well. Now, tomato blight, potato blight, it's the same pathogen. So my worry is, if I do get potato blight or tomato blight, will they affect the other crop? Now, they will be in buckets, so if I see any signs of tomato blight, I will remove those buckets straight away and protect them. So there is a little bit of a gamble, and this is the first year that I'm going to be growing them so close. But last year I did grow them next to the polytunnel, but this new tunnel has got ventilation all down the sides here that I'm going to be able to roll up the sides of this polytunnel. So this is a new design for me, so it means I can get a nice good airflow into the polytunnel, but if I see any signs of blight and stuff, you'd think, oh, straight away I'll close them down. If I feel that there's blight already in there, then I will do that to protect other crops outside and then remove everything from inside. But blight is one of those things that once it happens, remove everything off the top, but if that pathogen is now going all the way through the plant, it will start decimating everything about it. And that's the sad thing about tomato blight as well, is that once you get it there, it just keeps ramping down and it goes to neighbouring plots and neighbouring plots. So the good thing about having an allotment is if we get tomato blight or potato blight somewhere around the plots, they will notify us so that we know that it's either spreading down, and if it's going to be windy those days, I shut the polytunnel up as well and try and protect them as much as I can. But it's just one of those things we have to tackle, tomato blight and potato blight. Tomatoes and potatoes come from the same family, so yeah, it's the same pathogen basically. So I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible, but we have to deal with all these troubles with growing plants, and if it's not a pest, it's a pathogen, or it's just loads of things. So we're constantly battling something. So I've talked about first, second and main crop potatoes. But I'm going to try something completely different on this channel this year. Now, Robin at Robin Gardens, I'll pop a link to her channel underneath. Go and have a look. She's got a fantastic channel. I'll give her a subscribe. Tell her I've sent you along. But she is sending me some seed potatoes. Now, wait. She's not sending me seed potatoes. She's sending me seeds of potatoes. So I'm actually going to grow some potatoes this year from actual seed. Now, I've never done this before, so if you've ever seen on your potatoes the green tomato looking things, now be careful because they're very, very toxic. Do not eat them. Discard them straight away and wash your hands afterwards. But inside those little seed pods, there's actual potato seeds as well. So I'm actually going to try and grow potatoes directly from seeds this year. Now, I've never done this before, and it's an experiment for us, I'm sure for Robin as well. But this year, I'm going to be growing some potatoes from actual seeds. So follow me along on this channel. We'll see how we get on as well. But like I said, give Robin a subscribe as well in the description. But yeah, let's try potatoes from actual seed. So if you're going to follow along with me with potatoes this year, I am going to be growing in 30-litre buckets and also into raised beds. And I'm also going to be incorporating a watering system as well. But that one is an investment, I will admit. But I'll also put a link underneath to another watering system that I've actually used in a greenhouse before that I'm going to set up as well next to it. We're going to do a few comparisons this year because I want to try and crack potatoes a little bit. So fingers crossed we do that. But if you want to, I'll pop a link down underneath and have a look at those as well. And you can be used as well for inside your greenhouses or your polytunnels. And it connects to a water bit outside and not to your mains. And it can actually water everything on a timer. It's fantastic. I highly recommend this system. But I'm going a bit up on the scale now as well. I want it to water all the polytunnel. So I'll put both systems in the description so you can go and have a look at. They don't have to be used for growing potatoes or tomatoes. They can be used for out in the gardens and used for a multitude of things. But I thought I'd just put them in the links in the description. But I thought it might help you along. So if you're looking at things or you want to invest in something better this year to water things if you're going on holiday, I'll put them in the description. I'm Danny and this is Grow Up.